I see this will be a small group today. It's hard to I guess, compete against Ella. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. And let's see what I can give you on the way. So I've been asked to talk a bit about our experience that we had founding our startup, the stuff that went along the way, being in the US, coming back, and just give you a little bit of impression of the startup roller coaster ride that we were on. There's Mark Suster, who's a famous blogger, VC, and was an entrepreneur, once wrote on his blog, being an entrepreneur, you sleep like a baby, you wake up every 2 hours and cry. So that's like some of the experience you make. All right. I'm going to start with just a brief overview. Like, who knows Realities? What we do as a company? All right, good. Then let's do a little overview. Our vision is to make real-world places explorable that were out of reach before. And I'm not talking about 360 video, but really explorable. This is our menu. This is like a screenshot from what our menu looks like. So you have this globe in front of you, and there's different places that we scanned with pins on them, and you can spin the globe like when you were a kid and just like point somewhere, and when there's a pin, you can just travel there and check out that location. For example, you could go to a church in France and walk around there, or you could maybe check out a Victorian villa in San Francisco. Or how about visiting a temple in Taiwan? Or maybe a lost city in the Death Valley. Or maybe even check out the ISS. So those are all places that we scanned, actually. So this is not the real ISS, this is the training module in Cologne. We couldn't convince ESA or NASA to fly us up yet. We're working on it. But the cool thing, again, is like all those places, you can freely explore. Like, if I scan this stage here, I can walk around here. I can bend down, look at the details on the floor. We have people like literally lying on their back and rolling on the floor in the Vive headset in our environments. And we do this using a kind of old technique. It's actually comes out of 1890. The first algorithm was formulated. It's called photogrammetry. So you go around, you take a lot of pictures in a certain way. It's a bit of black magic to it at the moment. And then you end up with scans. And the quality that we get is just really amazing. You see, hopefully, no difference here between the original photo and the in-engine screenshots. Like, there's tiny little details, like on the chandeliers up there, you can see that there's some parts missing or the parts look a little molten. But so it's a very, very accurate way of capturing reality and putting that into virtual reality. So how did it all start? How did we end up founding a startup? I was working at Reflect before at the Audi VR experiences. So you know all about that already from the previous talks here, I guess. And at some point, I met my co-founder, David, at the VR meetups in Munich. And we started hanging out and talking, and like I've met him over a couple of meetups over like a year or so. And yeah, at some point he asked me, he's like, hey, let's meet up for lunch, let's have a burger, and asked me, hey, do you want to like start a startup? Like, nobody's kind of doing that photogrammetry stuff, and I really like that, and I think we should take that to virtual reality. And I was like, well yeah, okay, let's kind of do it. So yeah, we started to found Realities, and we didn't just stop there, but we made a happy little accident. We ended up going to Boost VC. I'm sorry, I think this clicker has a like slight delay, so I might skip back and forth a few pages sometimes. We got into an accelerator called Boost VC, which is a nice basement in San Mateo. To start our company, and we pretty much got in there right away. We started a company in December. In mid-December, we were on our way. And after a short skiing trip in the Sierra Nevada, we went into this lovely basement here. So not the glamour you might expect from Silicon Valley. Like, it was really just a basement. But we learned a whole lot in that basement. back there you can see David and Dominic, who was our co-founder, who by now unfortunately left us, who was stolen by NVIDIA. Shame on you back there. Working in the basement. And yeah, a few of those lessons I want to share with you because I think we really got some valuable lessons from there. We, as I said, came there mid-December, and the first thing that they told us, like, focus and build. Like, focus was Adam Draper's favorite word, the guy who's running the accelerator. So we heard that a lot. But that's what we did. Like, within 4 months until the launch of the HTC Vive in April, we sat down and we built an experience that we could launch on day one to be part of the launch program, to be there from the very, very beginning, which is super important in hindsight as well. So it was really just like sit down, hack together, build this MVP, build the basic mechanics. Like we had the globe, we had locations, like there was no scalable backend at all, there was nothing. We just had a couple of locations that we scanned, but we put that in, and that enabled us to learn, to get feedback, and to have something to show. So don't like sit back and wait till you have the perfect product that's ready to launch in every way possible, but just like get going, get it out, and build something. A big part of what was so valuable about the Boost VC program was that it enabled us to go over there and get connected to a shitload of people. It was not only the VR scene that is really, really buzzing over there, but it was also, you know, investors, VCs. Talk to those people that can actually, you know, give you the monetary backing to realize your ideas and your dreams. And then we just learned a whole lot in terms of little things. So none of us had ever started a company before. Like, how do you set that up? What's like the legal backend? Like, what are the contracts? Well, funny story, in Silicon Valley, if you found a company, there's actually an app for that. So you download the app and it takes you through most of the steps. But still, you need like good lawyers and you need advice and to set things up correctly. Because those things fall on your feet if you don't do them correctly in the beginning. So the part I want to talk more about is like learning to do the startup dance. It's what we called it. It's like all those little things, like how do you behave, how do you play the game, especially over there, things are very different. Like Germany and Europe is very B2B oriented. Like there's not that much venture capital, and so working with that and working in that environment, like having investors you have to pitch to, and like those people just doing business 24/7. Like even if there's like a casual dinner party or something, be ready to like have your pitch ready all the time. Like you have to be like they have to wake you up in the middle of the night, and you'd be like, we do like scan real world environments, and so always be ready. So the funny thing about founding a VR startup is that we have this bonus. So Eric Ries, the guy who invented the whole lean startup movement, says like a startup is a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So that uncertainty is about product market fit, basically. Like, is the thing that we're building solving a real problem, and are people ready to pay for that? So you are unsure about that, because otherwise, like if you just open another, you know, Dönerstand, then you know, like people are hungry and they want to eat, and like it's very predictable. With a startup, not so much. Like, will people want something like a social media thing like Facebook? Nobody had that before, so they were building that on the go, validating those assumptions. So you have to, you know, get to know your market. VR has the funny bonus that we don't know if there's going to be a market at all. Who knows? So you're making two bets here. One, that the thing you're building is something people want to buy and want to get, and that there's going to be a VR market at all. Let's talk about the desktop VR market. It's tiny. Like today, there's about 300,000, 400,000 assets out. That's nothing. Like people in gaming, they laugh about those numbers. They literally laugh in your face because they say like, we can't make any money with that. There's a few people, like the guys who from Alchemy Lab who did Job Simulator, like a few of those games that are literally on every Vive headset, and that were developed with a really small team, they are making money, but they are literally the only ones. Maybe porn, you would have to sit in the other theater to hear about that. But for like a good while, nobody's going to make money out of that. Unless you do B2B, like that's another thing. So it's all early adopters. So those people are a very different crowd than you know, the crowd that will actually scale up. So they are ready to take shit, to use weird programs, to not have the quality that they want. But it's also hard to learn from them and learn with them and to translate the findings that you have. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. Like things you learn now are valuable, no question, but they will not translate one-to-one to what comes later. Another thing about the VR market that is actually interesting, it's not enough good content out there. So people are really, really hungry for good content because a lot of the stuff that is out there is really bad. It's just the way it is. All right, let's talk a bit about fundraising because that's always something that comes up and people are really interested in. We saw a slight variation of that slide, I think, earlier this morning in Wolfgang's talk. It was more for the AR side, I think. Those are the VR investments, VR, AR investments, and when you talk about that, you have to like take out Magic Leap because that makes things really fuzzy. So this is without Magic Leap. And this is something that we felt also from like an anecdotal evidence basis, that there's a lot of, there was like a surge in investment. And before the actual launch of the Vive and the Oculus Rift in April, or like around April, so Q1, there was this magical feeling before, like people were just really, really optimistic, and they were like, yeah, we know, like everything points against like huge numbers in the beginning, but because there were no little numbers as well to tell you, people were ready to invest, to make bets, and to place a few bets before things got started. Now we are at the position that things actually got kicked off, and now the feeling is that investors are holding a bit back, rather, just like see where we are going, what's happening, and so they want you to show numbers, they want you to show traction, they want to see how you're doing. So we see now a lot of sit back and wait, because they have nothing to lose if they wait a little longer, just to see, you know, who takes the lead, who makes a step forward. So how am I doing on time, guys? What is perfect? Okay, cool. Let's talk about the investor landscape. It's interesting to see who's out there, who's investing. There's early accelerators that invest in really young companies, really high risk investments. They usually get like a good chunk of your company for very little money, but that's a fair deal because it's a really high risk investment. At that point, 9 of 10 startups still fail. So they try to spread that risk across a lot of companies. It's Vivax, who was recently that was recently initiated by HTC. There's Boost VC, which I talked about already. They have the biggest portfolio in terms of VR companies yet. It's about 45 companies. Until shortly, there was River. They just imploded because it's a really funny story. Like, read up on that if you're into that. The guy who founded the program basically like shelled out all their money for like Super Bowl lodges and weird stuff. It's a really it sounds like a movie. It's really funny. Unless you were invested in by River, then probably it's not that funny. All right, there's innovator funds. So it's normally really small funds. They don't have that big of a fund size, like tens of millions. And what they do is they are really specialized in like some really cutting edge technologies. It's mostly like VR, AR, drones, space, AI. Like that's usually the buzzwords that you hear there. And they try to get in early as well. Like when your company is still, like you get a good chunk of your company for little money, like a seed funding stage. And they try to really make up by that for knowing the scene well, and those are the guys that a lot of the bigger investors come to when they want to make an investment, and they talk to them because they know the scene a lot better. One of the leading guys is Tipitat Janavasi from the virtual reality fund, and he's really well known in the industry and goes to all the conferences, goes around. Another guy, the guy who founded Anorak Ventures, is Greg Castle, who's an angel investor, who's one of the first people to invest in Oculus. Yeah, got a good chunk of money out of that, and now he's reinvesting that kind of stuff. Then also a really interesting part is like there's a lot of Asian funds that are really aggressively investing in VR AR. There's GRI, a Japanese fund. They set up a special VR fund. There's the Shanda group, who, for example, invested in Upload VR and a couple of other VR-related things. There's Colorable. They invested in us. It's a Japanese fund. They have like a special fund for VR. So there's a lot of interest coming there, and they are very aggressively searching out deals and trying to get ahead, where a lot of the Silicon Valley bigger investors are a bit more conservative and a bit slower. There's corporate funds. It's also a really interesting part. Those funds are usually a lot bigger, so they have a lot of money, and they do everything from seed, not so much seed, more like Series A and then upwards. So they really shell out a lot of money. It's people like Qualcomm Ventures, it's HTC, it's Comcast Ventures, Samsung Ventures, GV, which is Google Ventures. Google Ventures is like very independent, but I still count them to here. So often what we see with those funds is that they make strategic investments. So you know, like Comcast, for example, is this broadcasting company, and they are looking a lot for people doing streaming, finding solutions for you know, building the backbones that will allow us to consume AR, VR content, and searching out those kind of companies to include in their portfolio. Like on the one hand, to invest and make money out of that, but also just to have like a connection and a possibility to jump into those. Someone who's really aggressively investing in the whole space is HTC. So they are trying, obviously, they're struggling as a company. They're trying to push VR with the Vive headset a lot. And they are really bullish on that, trying to put in a lot of money to create content and get that ecosystem going, because it's a bit of their last chance. Like their phone business is dying. So really interesting, but you have to be a bit careful working together with those funds, because they sometimes really try to push you in a direction where they, you know, kind of can buy your company afterwards or have like a really good starting point to do that. And then there's established funds. Like, yeah, Andreessen Horowitz probably being like the most famous one. They placed a few big bets in things like Magic Leap and Oculus, DFJ, Formation 8. So those are really big established funds, and what we see there is, okay, they go for like the bigger companies, like, yeah, Magic Leap, Lytro, stuff like that. But a lot of them are placing like a 1-2 initial bets in the VR sector as well, just to be part of the sector that's evolving, and just to see what's going on there and learn, not so much to make a big investment or expecting a big return. All right. Then there's also the VRVCA, the Virtual Reality Venture Capital Association or Alliance, I think it is, with like a bunch of yeah, that was set up by HTC as well. They meet like a few times a year, 6 times a year, I think. You can like send your pitch deck there. It's a bit like Shark Tank for VR. So I haven't really heard anybody participating in that. Like, I'm not sure how serious that all is, but we'll see. I mean, they set up a $10 billion fund, so it's a huge number, which is of course exciting for VR. But yeah, we'll just see how that goes. Yeah, there's big people in there, like 500 Startups or Sequoia. All right, so a few example investments, and I think there's an interesting pattern to be seen here. Just like a few things emerging. We have like the super crazy famous things like Blipper, which is one of the first AR unicorns, Magic Leap, which is beyond good and evil anyway. And Lytro, which is building light field cameras, they also got really substantial investments. So those guys are building really, really far out crazy tech that just gives them such a competitive advantage and puts them in such an interesting position that basically people are pouring money and like they are like begging to pour money into those companies. But that's like the exception. That's really, really rare. Then there's some companies like NextVR, Jaunt, also High Fidelity, I think, which is just like, it's really good teams and they're solving some really tractable problems. Like NextVR does live streaming for VR, and you know them because they do like a lot of live streaming and they have like now a customer-facing app. But what they actually do is working a lot of the compression. So the company is founded on like some patents around compression of video and streaming and all of that kind of stuff. So they are building legitimate tech that is really just going to be important for like a whole while. Also, Jaunt is building 360 cameras and stitching solutions. Their last, so by the way, those numbers below the companies are the amount of money that they raised so far. Jaunt is a really interesting case because they actually started with a really shitty product, but they were just really, really good at fundraising. They managed to sell a vision and get a lot of money for that because everybody was trying to get like a good partner to start into that space, and like their last funding round was led by Walt Disney, and also ProSieben was part of that, and Axel Springer put in a lot of money. High Fidelity is cool. It's like by Philip Rosedale, one of the co-founders of Second Life. Also, a really interesting company. They're trying to build the metaverse, like the internet for VR. Then there's like hardware kind of companies. Fove is eye tracking, HMD, 8i is volumetric capture, Matterport is scanning technology, also hardware side. Those guys got quite a good run for fundraising because also they are just building hard tech that gives them an advantage, gives them IP. That's something investors are interested in because it creates an entry hurdle. Then more interesting is like the content side. So we've seen recently a lot of investment in content teams, which is unusual because those guys are not scalable. So they are not part of the normal Silicon Valley kind of bet where you expect like a times X return of your investment because they will not scale that much probably. But the interesting thing and why a lot of people are looking into that now, I think, is because they are kind of safe bets. So Alchemy has been there from the beginning. They've been building Job Simulator. They're building a Rick and Morty game now. So they have a proven track record of building good VR, and that is something that is rare. Good VR content is still rare. Same thing for Kite and Lightning. They just have been doing some really, really cool stuff. Steel Wool was interesting because the entire 5 millions came from AHTC. So basically, they just bought the studio. It's kind of an investment, but it's actually they bought the studio. There's a few cool niche applications just done by people that are well connected and also have a proven track record. It's The Wave. They're building this social DJing, partying VR app. There's Visionary VR, who built Mindshow, which is an animating tool for VR, and Altspace, which is a social platform. So those guys have been invested a lot by those kind of seed early or like those innovator funds that just know the scene well. And it's an interesting concept, and they believe in it, and it's a good team behind it executing. And yeah, the last thing is Weaver, Baobab Studios, Spaces. Those are basically all people going a bit into like the entertainment industry, made up of Pixar, ILM veterans, Disney veterans. So it's just really, really well experienced teams that funded those studios, and they were just able to take that track record and get funding with it. Because everybody was kind of like, well, we don't really know what you're doing, but you guys know your shit, so here's a lot of money and like do something with it. Again, that's not a very scalable investment, but it's a kind of solid investment. It's like you will not lose a lot of that. You won't probably lose money, and you will learn a lot and have a connection into the space. All right. So my humble fundraising advice and we are by no means any experts in that, is your demo is your pitch. VR, this is absolutely true. If you don't have a demo that blows people's minds, like you can basically just stay at home and work on that till that happens, because literally anybody else who's pitching will probably have a demo that blows minds. So that's the new baseline. Focus on investors that believe in VR. Like if an investor is not, if he's not convinced or she that VR is going to be a market, which is still an open question, like don't try to convince them, because you will not be the one who convinces them. Like they either have made up their mind and believe in it or not, but just try to go for investors that already made that assumption by looking at their portfolio. So if they have any bets in VR yet, that's how we did it. And then, especially early investments are all about the team. We've seen that in, like, that's why I brought up those examples. So showing you that just a good team is a really, really solid starting point, and some people were able to raise a lot of money just with that. Because it just reduces the risk that an investor has giving you the money, that you will just like end up burning it for nothing. All right. Still going? Okay, I'll make it quick. I just wanted to talk a little bit about our last move, which was coming after Boost VC, not staying in the Silicon Valley, but coming back to Berlin, and the reasoning behind that, which might be interesting for some of you. So there's a few points I want to talk about. The Bay versus Berlin, operations, the cost of operation is just insanely high in the Bay Area. Like, it's out of control. Like, for a junior engineer, you will pay $120,000 per year. $120,000 per year for somebody who you not know if they're any good. Like, that's an entry level. And still, you will have a hard time hiring people because they are snatched up by Google, Facebook, and all the other big guys who can afford that. Like, they can afford just like hiring somebody like a junior, see if they are any good, and like if they don't perform after half a year, they just like fire them again, which is not a problem in the US. But yeah, so finding good people and paying them. Like I've heard salary numbers for like experienced engineers going up to 400K a year. So that's just insane. Berlin is a little cheaper in that regard. Like, you get a good engineer for 50K a year, and that's like a really good salary. Also, you can do a lot more with that salary in Berlin. Like a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco or the entire Bay Area costs you about $3,500, and you get the same thing for in Berlin for like 500 euros. So it's a ×7 cost of living for like a double the amount of salary. So it's a weird thing, and a lot of people actually over there are kind of pissed about that, and you hear a lot of grumbling about that. Fundraising. Well, fundraising is like, if you are literally going to, if that is something that's important for your business, that you do fundraising, you have to be in the US, and you have to be a US company, period. Like, you can raise funds here, but it's so much harder, and you don't want to start a business just with this handicap. So if that is something that's central to your business, go over there, found a US company, raise funds, and then you can still decide if you want to come back. Like, that's literally what we did, but more of that in a second. The scene, there's a bigger VR scene. There's more happening. It's a way more professional VR scene over in the US. I still like the Berlin VR scene a lot. I think it's very different. It will give birth to very different experiences. A lot more artsy, a lot more experimental. And I like that. I like being surrounded by people that, you know, are not just crunching business model numbers all the time, but actually have a bit more vision, and especially for a new medium like VR, I think that is something really valuable. Yeah, hiring, I talked about that already. It's also finding people that have the skills needed for VR, which is mainly like game developers, is really hard in the Bay because there are no game studios, or not many, which is again related to the cost factor, because most people, like especially indie games, they don't make a lot of money, and then living in such an expensive place is hard. Berlin, on the other side, and Hamburg, they have like a certain game developer indie scene, and you can recruit talent from that a lot easier. Also, you have the advantage that you can get people from all over the European Union in like literally a couple of days to come over, join your startup. Whereas getting work permits in the Bay Area is literally a lottery because there are too many applicants. So only 2/3 of the like asked for working visa are just granted. So literally, when you bring somebody in, it's a lottery play if they can actually start working for you. So a lot of weird things. Our current setup, which is kind of unusual, I heard, but we ended up with that after being at Boost. So we founded Realities as a US corporation, a Delaware C Corp, which is some legal entity, which is pretty much requested by every investor because it just gives you the best starting ground. So we were able to raise money in the US, and now we have something called a production side in Germany, which is literally just that we have an office here. So we can act outwards facing like a legal German entity without any problems. We can hire people here, all no problem. But we are this US company, which is just asked for by a lot of investors, and also gives us a little more international feeling towards others. So that is something we ended up after like a lot of consideration and talking to a lot of lawyers, but it's actually like I've recently talked to this guy from like a startup lobby kind of thing in Berlin. Like he said, like that is actually a really, really interesting and cool concept and setup that makes you very, very flexible. All right, last advice. If you really are looking into fundraising, like spend time in the US rather sooner than later. If you can, always come back later, but getting started there, making the connections, getting to know people is especially important in the beginning. It's like don't hide here till you're like, yeah, we're not ready. It's only gonna get more complicated and expensive later on. Try to do that from the start. As Bob Ross said, there's a lot of happy little accidents. That's what we made along the way. Most of them turned out to be quite fortunate and good, which we're very happy about. But that's just how it is. Like you built the plane while flying. For us, it turned out good. We'll see how it turns out in the future. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out with me here instead of like the certainly very interesting talk that I unfortunately missed as well over there. And if you have any questions, just come over and ask me.